Hello, and welcome to my first movie review in some time. I'm, of course, here to talk about Furiosa, the newest Mad Max film, a film that I admittedly was not necessarily hyped for. I'm not that familiar with the Mad Max films. I've seen Fury Road, but that's it. So I just went to see this film because I was curious why it was underperforming. Obviously, it's gotten extreme critical success, and audiences seem to be loving it, so why isn't this film performing very well? I wanted to see for myself, and right out the gate, I enjoyed this film very much. I didn't like it as much as Fury Road, but we'll get into that. But I definitely think it's worth going to see in the theaters. So if you haven't already, go and check it out. And even if you have seen it, maybe go a second time. Let's try to keep these movie theaters alive. If you're like me and you love the cinematic experience, support this film. I'm not trying to preach to you, but I really do think movie theaters really are struggling now. If my local theater is any indication, boy, they have a hard time. But yeah, go and check this film out. Before we even get into discussing it in a deep dive, it's worth seeing in theaters. So this film is a character study. It's called a Mad Max Saga, and I think that's probably because the film takes place over a pretty long period of time, and it's totally focused on Furiosa, as the name would suggest, and it's a very interesting exploration of the character Furiosa. I wouldn't say she's necessarily a super complex character, but we do get a lot of stuff to add to her character, even though I think, she doesn't speak a lot. There's very little dialogue from her actually in the film. And something that surprised me was through probably half the film, maybe not quite half the film, Furiosa is actually played by a child actress who is not Anya Taylor-Joy. But the transition from the young actress to Anya Taylor-Joy was totally seamless. But there's like a 15-year time jump approximately. So we start the film with Furiosa right out the gate. We see her in her tribe's land. It's this sort of oasis in the desert where this lush landscape with the trees and the water, and the bikers are raiding them, and they steal Furiosa, and Furiosa's mother comes after them, and there's this really pretty long sequence of Furiosa's mother hunting them down. There's a lot of sniping going on, and one thing I've noticed in this film is that I don't think any of the heroes ever missed a single shot. It was just bullseye accuracy every time, which is kind of fun and schlocky. But I also noticed in this sequence at the beginning, Chris Hemsworth's wife makes an appearance, Elsa Pataki, I believe her name is. She also appears later on in the film, and I noticed it right away, but it didn't bother me. I mean, she's an actress and works very well in the film. But I thought it's just a funny little thing. Obviously, in Thor: Love and Thunder, I think she's in that too, actually. But Chris Hemsworth's daughter is Love in that movie. But this opening sequence was very, very entertaining, and it's a smaller scale action sequence, especially compared to what happens later on in the film, and even compared to Fury Road. It's a nice sort of easing you into the world again. But this all culminates with us meeting Dr. Dementis, played by Chris Hemsworth, who is, everybody's saying, and it's true, he is the most exciting part of the film. He steals the show. Chris Hemsworth finally gets to do something really different. I've always thought he's a really good actor, and especially he's really good at comedy, but I never thought he really has been given the opportunity to really stretch his chops. And this is not necessarily that either. He's playing a very campy villain, but at least he gets to do something different, and he kills it. There are even moments in the film where he has a bit more edge to him, when he's a bit darker of a character. A lot of times he's kind of a klutz, and he's just a bit of a goofball. But he at the end of the film, when he's facing off with Furiosa at the very end, he's talking about how we're alike and we've lost everything, and we're just trying to get by, and it turns us into these evil people. And I think his character is nice. It doesn't necessarily mirror Furiosa, but there's like a kind of he thinks that her life mirrors his, but really she thinks that she's trying to deny that. And I think it's interesting character dynamic between the two. Of course, Dementis sort of adopts Furiosa, calls her Little D, and I think it's only maybe a year or two that she actually spends with him in the movie before she's traded off with Immortan Joe. And then there's a 15-year or so time jump that we see. Then Anya Taylor-Joy is introduced. And I was surprised by how many. I really shouldn't have been, but there were so many characters from Fury Road that were introduced here, and it feels a bit weird watching Fury Road and then this. I definitely would suggest, if you haven't seen Fury Road, watch this one first, because it feels weird meeting all the characters in Fury Road and then you're sort of being reintroduced to some of them. in Furiosa, and I guess that kind of works in a sort of a meta sense too, because there is a huge gap of time between those two movies being released. But it just felt weird, like we're meeting Immortan Joe, and we're meeting the People Eater, we're meeting the Organic Mechanic, and all these people, like pretty much everybody comes back in Fury Road except for Dementis, even Scrotus. So it was, I just thought that was a bit weird on a fourth wall breaking level. But it didn't bother me. I understand they need to do this. It's a movie, all right? And if people that haven't, are not familiar with Fury Road like myself, they have to introduce these characters. And I think that was totally fine. And I really love the scenes, those scenes when Dementis first goes to the Citadel and he meets all the key players, and we set up the Lords. But even like the Bullet Farmer got like no dialogue. He was very little, but he was a huge part of Fury Road. Dementis barters for control of Gastown, which he gets, and essentially there's, from what I understand, the players are essentially, Immortan Joe's got the Citadel, but he's sort of controlling, he's sort of overseeing everything. The Bullet Farmer obviously is in charge of the Bullet Farm, and then Dementis gets Gastown. Those are, I think, the three fortresses. As far as I remember, there's not any more than that. Those are the sort of the checkpoints of the wasteland. The sort of everything's concentrated there. That's where all the operations. One supplies the gas, one supplies food, one supplies water. Yeah, there are bullets, obviously. So it's nice and simple to follow as far as I'm concerned. So you can figure out, and then so when the war rages, the 40 Days War between Dementis and Immortan Joe, I think the Bullet Farmer's with Immortan Joe, right? So they're working together. But we don't really see very much of that. It's very quickly over. It's like the last chunk of the film, and then we move into the finale. But my biggest problem with this film, I would say, is probably the pacing. I did find it was very stop and start here and there, and I think that's a bit weird, especially comparing to Fury Road that was nonstop the entire time. And maybe that's not a fair comparison. I should think of it as its own film. And perhaps because it is a saga, and it does cover a long period of time, they needed to break it up into chapters like they did and sort of say, okay, that's one aspect of our story, moving on to the next. And for that, I guess it kind of worked, but it did sort of hurt the pacing for me. And I felt like, okay, we're getting into something. Okay, we're done. We're getting into something. Oh, we're done. And there were a lot of times where the sort of cliche, dun dun, fade to black, and start over, dun dun, fade to black. And it happened so many times throughout the film, and that I think it's almost, that's almost like a fourth wall breaking thing too, because George Miller probably knows, this is a bit of a cliche thing, but, it works. And Mad Max is sort of a, it's sort of a pastiche, really, of an older type of film. And certainly the Mad Max films, from the 70s, or I think only the first one was in the 70s, late 70s, but they really don't make films like this anymore, that really have had this sort of just craziness to them, that this world that's totally the idea of, like, this brainchild of this one guy. It's like sort of George Lucas with Star Wars. That's like Mad Max with George Miller. It's this weird, bizarre creation, but it is grounded in our world, I guess, far in the future in Australia. But I think watching this film, and I went into this film, like I mentioned before, curious as to why it's underperforming, and I think I understand why. It's because though this film has a lot of the characteristics that make it a blockbuster, and it's got the crazy action and the bombastic moments and the big name actors, it's not a family film. It's not the kind of like a Marvel film where you can take your kids and you can take your grandparents, and every side of the family is going to enjoy it. This film is much more niche, I think, and there's a lot of grotesque moments, a lot of really intense violence, and I think that's probably why it's a bit harder for the general public to digest. But for people who know what they're getting into, it's very enjoyable. So it's this difficult thing. And if you may remember that Fury Road also did not perform well at the box office, and so I think, of course, everybody knows that the box office should not be a gauge of the quality of a film, and it's not. So don't ignore the box office numbers, and for once I should say listen to the critics, even though I normally say ignore the critics, but you should, because for once the critics and the audiences are aligned, and I agree with them. This is a very, very entertaining film and a solid film, and definitely worth the trip to the theater. But some other positives, of course, I've talked about Anya Taylor-Joy, who I think is an excellent actress. I'm glad, she's one of those actresses who just sort of past few years has just really exploded in her fame, the amount of work she's doing. And I think she's very, very good in this film. Like I said, she doesn't speak a lot, but she has a good presence. And I think she feels like the same character for me that Charlize Theron played in Fury Road. I think that really works. And she really does a lot of good acting with just her face. And there's a lot of good, even just emotional moments. And the relationship that she has with Praetorian Jack, I believe, Tom Burke. He was great, and he didn't have that much of a role in the film, but he was very memorable, and their sort of romance they had, it wasn't, sexual, but it was a bond that they had, and I think that really worked. And it made me, I instantly started caring about Jack, and he felt very real. He didn't feel like he was trying to screw her over or anything, he felt like he was a genuine friend, which I think, especially in this film and Fury Road, it's very hard to tell when people are actually on your side or they're just screwing you, and I think you could just tell right away that this guy was a genuine person and he actually cared about her, and I think that was a very nice change and a nice dichotomy to all the other evil people in this Mad Max world, and it worked very well for me. The ending was an interesting set of scenes, I have to say. I think Dementus's demise was very satisfying, the idea that he's sort of just being left to rot in the Citadel with a tree growing out of him, and he's giving them fruit essentially, which I thought was very funny. But the fact that it had to tie in so neatly with Fury Road, with it going right into the wives escaping with Furiosa, fine. I mean, obviously, this film was written in the way like the Star Wars prequels, where everything was very neatly tying together. From what I can remember, at least, I haven't seen Fury Road in quite some time, but I mean, I don't think that hindered the film in any way, but it was very obvious, But I guess like I said, if you're watching Furiosa before Fury Road, which I would actually suggest for newcomers, then you won't even notice it. It'll probably be very seamless, and for that reason, I think that was probably very smart of them to do it. But in the moment, it was kind of a bit weird. But I think the wrap up of the film overall was very good. Obviously, we had Furiosa shave her head. She got the she got the robotic arm. I love when she pulls the cord on to start the little motor on her arm, so she can use it to cut the little bear off Dementus. But that final showdown with Dementus, when she's just there, and he's on his knees, you need to make it epic, and that was a fun scene, and even just the sort of like the multiple endings thing that I think he was the History Man, that was his name, the guy who looked like Saruman, was saying. Some people thought she had shot him dead. Some people thought she dragged him through the wasteland. And then he says, but she told me that he's the fertilizer for this tree, this peach tree. And I think that was very funny. You could sort of pick your own ending. I really like that. And I think nice wrap up for the characters and for Dementus. Since Dementus is the only one really in this film that doesn't come over to the next film, it's nice that he has a very sort of ceremonious ending for him that worked really well, and it just tied together the film really well for me, and it's nice to see her get his revenge against him. So overall, definitely entertaining film. It's definitely not my favorite film I've seen this year or anything. It's not even my favorite Mad Max film of the two I've seen, but it's inspired me to. I definitely should watch the rest of the Mad Max films, obviously. I definitely have heard lots of great things. But I don't know. I think Furiosa it's the kind of film that I really wish would be a huge success. But people know about it. Even if people aren't going to even if people aren't going to the theater to see it, they're hearing about it. Maybe they'll rent it on DVD. Now, it's not like this is the end of the Mad Max films. I know, as far as I'm aware, George Miller is intending on making more, and the guy's almost 80 years old. So, hats off to him. He's a really cool guy, a really genuine filmmaker. He's the kind of guy, sort of one of the last greats that really cares about making a cinematic experience and not just a sort of paint by numbers sort of film that he knows will get people in. And he probably doesn't even necessarily care that the film is doing that well at the box office, since the Mad Max films don't really, typically. So I'm sure we'll see more in the future from him. Hopefully we'll see even more that isn't Mad Max. Hopefully maybe he expands into more things. But yeah, lots of entertainment value here. Definitely go and see it. Worth a watch. Highly recommend. Hope you enjoyed watching. Let me know what you thought of Furiosa, if you've seen it, if you're planning to go see it, and what you think of the other Mad Max films without spoiling them for me, because I do intend to watch them. And let's get the conversation started as always. So if you enjoyed this video, you know what to do, and I will see you next time.